Okay, so welcome to this tutorial on using Microsoft Excel for data analysis for the edTPA. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about um, what you need to do in order to set up your data analysis. And so what I'm going to have you do is, first of all, open up a sheet in Microsoft Excel. So go ahead on your computer and open up Excel. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about how to use Excel in this video, but if you have no experience with Excel, you might want to go on YouTube and watch some of the more in-depth tutorials. I'm going to show you some of the things you need to do just to do the data analysis, but you may need to go further into the tutorial. So this is my teaching document right here. What we're going to end up doing is creating an analysis of a data from a particular test. So I chose a 6-item test. You can choose a much longer test if you would like, but I'm going to talk through some of the things that are in this test and why I think this one is good for analysis. So what we are doing in the edTPA is we are doing an analysis of the whole class, plus we are doing an analysis of at least 3 target students who have different learning needs. So you need to focus in on the exams of 3 different target students. I usually choose a very high level student who this assessment was maybe too easy for, or you know, they hit all of their target learning goals very easily. A student who kind of represents the majority of the class, so kind of your, you know, right in the middle of the bell curve. And then usually a student with an IEP, so I can talk about differentiation within the learning segment, and then how those, how I differentiated my instruction, and then what I learned when they took the assessment. So what you are doing in this document is you are trying to figure out what you taught, how you taught it, and if you taught it well enough that students were learning it. So you are grouping everything in the test by learning objectives and by those levels of sophistication in terms of testing. So remember, on any exam, we're going to have those low level in Bloom's taxonomy, you know, basic just remembering, reiterating, and then we are going to move up to the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, where students are actually analyzing and applying to different situations. So you do want to make sure that on your exam you do have that complexity. Although I think on the edTPA, you're mostly going to be talking about subject level, but talking about the complexity is important when you get into, say, why a student with an IEP may not have understood a question that required that higher order thinking, or why, you know, the majority of the class didn't get a particular question, but your gifted student did get that question. So that is helpful as well. So first, what I want to just show you in terms of Excel is that just to kind of basics, if you highlight the whole screen, you can change the width of the rows. And if you highlight the whole screen, you can also change the height of the columns, the height of the cells. So that's just important as you start to think about how to format what you have here. So I'm going to increase the size just a little bit, and then I'm going to increase the size of my first column here. So what am I analyzing? First of all, I'm analyzing each question. I want to take each question. So I have a 6-item test. So I'm going to start down here and I'm going to say, okay, I have 6 questions. So question number, and I'm going to have question number 1, question number 2, question number 3, question number 4, question number 5, and question number 6. Okay, so I have decided, and I'm going to center this just so it's easy to read. And I'm also going to bold that because it's an important level. So I'm looking at these 6 test items and I'm trying to see something about these test items. What do I know about these test items in terms of how did students do on them? I mean, in the past, we would look at an exam and would say, oh yeah, most of my students got an A, right? Or most of my students got a C, but we didn't really look into why did they get a C. Maybe they were all missing the same exact thing. Maybe everybody was missing a really complicated upper level question, and for some reason you counted it as 40% of the grade, right? So it also helps us to realize if we constructed the test in a good way. So then I'm going to look at each of my questions and determine their question level. So Marzano defines question levels. He simplifies Bloom's taxonomy, and he looks at basic questions, target, and advanced. And target, he says, are questions that really get precisely at the learning goal. So it's a little bit higher than just memorizing, right? So that if you gave the information to a much younger student and they didn't understand any context, but they could just regurgitate something, that would be at the basic level. The target level is kind of understanding the context, and advanced is usually making those connections to other periods of history or other aspects of the curriculum if you're in math or science, and making those broader connections across what they've learned in other ways. So basic, target, and advanced. And then I'm going to say, all right, well, what were my learning objectives? Okay, so I want to map each of these questions to a particular learning objective, because the whole goal of the unit is to make sure that students are meeting my learning objectives. So I need to know if on the test I asked a question that let me know if they understood the learning objective or not. So I'm going to be mapping every question to a particular learning objective, and I'm going to do a question level for each question. And then I'm going to take my class and see how each member of the class did. So I'm actually going to insert a column here so I can put my class. Now, when you do the edTPA, if you're teaching secondary, you likely have 2, 3, maybe even 4 sections of the same class. You're not going to take every section. You're going to focus on one section. So in your list, you are probably going to have somewhere between 16 and 25 students on the list. And you're going to focus in on at least 3 students. Please check your handbook. Handbooks differ a little, so you might need to do 2 students or 4 students. Look at your handbook. They tell you how many students to focus in on, but for most handbooks, it's 3. So I had a small class of Harry Potter devotees, Ron, Percy, Neville, and Luna. And then I'm going to take an aggregate of the whole class. How did the whole class do? So this is super important on the edTPA. You need to not just be talking about individual students, but you also need to be talking about the whole class, and then also how did those students do in comparison to the whole class. So this is a sum of all of these different students, right? So I'm going to show you a little bit about these different questions, right? And then how they map on to particular learning objectives. But I'm going to go back to my learning segment goals. So remember that for the edTPA, we chose 5 lessons that hung together around a group of learning objectives that were all interconnected. So the learning segment is usually a sub part of a unit. Remember, a unit is roughly 3 to 6 weeks long, that has a greater theme or skill that it hangs together. The learning segment is usually 3 to 5 days within that, a subtopic within that unit, okay? So I'm looking at ancient cultures. This is my ancient culture unit, and I just had a learning segment on ancient Greece before this. And now this learning segment is about ancient Rome. So I'm looking at ancient civilizations, and I'm helping students to understand how these ancient civilizations differed and what we can learn from them and what they teach us about the world we live in today. What lessons can we get from those? So in order to analyze this, I have to go back to my learning objectives, right? And I have to make sure that there's alignment. Now, when you submit the edTPA, In task 1, you talked about your learning objectives. In task 2, you talked about your learning objectives. In task 3, you're talking about the same learning objectives, right? Because in task 1, you were designing these learning objectives. You were trying to teach that information, right? And so you wanted to make sure that you were teaching to the learning objectives. And then task 2, you showed your students grappling with that information, understanding it. Task 2, you did formative assessments during the class to show them starting to learn it. Task 3 is where they do this summative assessment and you see what they finally learned and how it connected to the learning objectives. So I'm just going to pull my learning objectives here from my learning segment. And I'm going to put this over here so that you can see it. So I'm gonna just spread this out just a little bit. Okay, so now you can see on the screen my learning objectives here. So these are what I set out in the beginning of the unit to make sure that students know about ancient Rome. Students will be able to identify the names and roles of political leaders of ancient Rome. Number 2, students will be able to analyze the impacts of political organization on the development of ancient civilizations. So this was a broader learning objective for the entire unit, right? This learning segment is about ancient Rome as a civilization. And so I'm looking at political organization of ancient Rome on this particular test. But I'm also, looking those links to the ancient Greece unit that we already studied, and thinking about those developments as well, thinking about the Han Dynasty as well in China. Number 3, students will be able to identify the geographic location of important sites in ancient Rome and analyze the impacts of cultural diffusion. So we want to know geography, we want to know cultural diffusion. Those are my 3 main learning objectives. That's what I'm teaching on this test. That's what I'm teaching in this unit. And that's what I'm assessing on this test. Do they know these particular things? Okay, so I'm going to show you, I'm going to stop the share of this for just a second. And we are going to look at the actual test and answers, just so you have an idea of what I mean. So you're going to take your test. And so I'm going to share screen here. I'm going to share the test with you. And you're going to look at these questions, and then I'm going to talk about how they were classified and how they connect to the learning objectives here, right? So what are the characteristics of an empire experiencing a golden age? So the students are answering this. Now, I will say that having short answer like this is kind of nice for the edTPA, because you get students using the language versus multiple choice, which is a little bit more difficult to analyze. It's definitely not impossible to analyze multiple choice in this way, but I think that this might be an easier way to really talk about the students and show the difference between the students too, because then you can see really the complexity of the thinking. So what are the characteristics of an empire experiencing golden age? Now, I taught this unit, so I know that this is a basic level question, because this is in one of the very first slides that they do in the whole unit. And then when we go into ancient Rome, we remind them of this as well, characteristic of an empire experiencing a golden age. So they have memorized this. Even if they don't fully understand this, they could have memorized this list. So we think of it kind of as a basic question, right? And so we want to think about to have a golden age, an empire must have a period with a relative peace. They must have a well-functioning government that can meet the needs of the people. They can have happy citizens whose needs are being met, and technological, cultural, and scientific advancements of some kind. All right, so for me, that's a basic question, and I know that this is in terms of my learning objectives, this is related to political organization because I'm talking about an empire. Like, what is an empire? What's a golden age of an empire? That is a political organization question. So it maps onto learning objective 1. I'm going to talk about these 3, then we'll go back to the Excel sheet and I'll show you those. Then number 2, what was the first triumvirate? Where did it exist? Who was involved and why was it important? And this one, I really want students to talk about these leaders, okay? I want them to talk about Julius Caesar. I want them to talk about Pompey the Great, the end of the Roman Republic. So these are the things that I want them to talk about in this section, so that this is my leaders question. And then and so that's a target question, right? So it's beyond basic. They have to talk about why it was important. And then, do you think Rome worked better as an empire or republic, and why? And so this is an advanced question, right? So they're getting at more advanced analysis because they have to say why Rome worked better as an empire or republic. I also know this is an advanced question because there's not a right answer. It's about their analysis. So they can answer worked better is a value judgment, right? So what do you think works better? If you want to talk about voice and participation, they might say that it worked better as a republic. And so they would talk about why it's important to have a voice in your government, right? If they were thinking worked better is about efficiency, right, then they may be talking about Rome being better as an empire. Sorry. So because this is a divergent question, there's multiple answers that are acceptable. Usually divergent questions are advanced level questions. And so I would put this as an advanced level question. I would also say it's about political organization. So it's my learning objective 3. All right, so I just want to map this onto the Excel document so you can see what that looks like, okay? So I'm going to pop over here to the Excel screen, and you can see here, so my question 1, that was, in terms of question level, that was just memorizing, remember, the things about an empire and a golden age. And that was connected to my learning objective 1. Okay, so learning objective 1. I'm sorry, learning objective 2. Okay, so learning objective 2 is political organization. Right, wrap the text. So what I did there is in terms of making that a little bigger, and then I'm going to say that's learning objective 2, political organization. Remember question 2 that was my target question. And that was learning objective 1 about leaders. That was when I was asking about the first triumvirate. I'm going to hit wrap text there. That gets it into my cell. And then remember that my third one was that divergent question. What works better, this Rome as a republic or Rome as a empire? And this is really getting clearly at my political organization. So what works better, and what worked better in Rome? And is that true in other places too? You know, were there weaknesses to the Republic in Rome? What can we learn from the weaknesses of the Republic of Rome, right? Do we value efficiency or equality, voice, those kinds of things? So those are my 3 questions. So I have question 1, 2, and 3. I've now said question 1's basic, question 2's target, question 3's advanced, and political organization, leaders, and political organization. So I've hit 2 of my learning objectives. Now let's look at the last 3 questions and see if I get at some of my other learning objectives. Remember, you need to have an assessment that gets at your learning objectives. I would really recommend trying to focus on 3 to 5 learning objectives. Having more than 5 learning objectives for both task 1 and task 3 specifically can be difficult. So really focus in on what you want students to know. And you'll notice how my learning objectives are broad in subject, right? They aren't like students will be able to identify Julius Caesar, right? That's too specific a learning objective, right? So students will be able to identify the names and roles of political leaders of ancient Rome. So that's a broader question. It's easier to analyze. There are multiple things within that. Okay, so I'm gonna pop over here to my test one more time, just so you can see the last 3 questions and how they connect. So the question 4 is identifying places on a map, right? So this is really target, you know, like students wanting to know target. You could identify this as target or basic. Some teachers might say basic. There is some leeway in here, but I say target just because this is really important to me that students know these locations. So you'll notice that they're cities and rivers mainly. And then question 5 asks about the functioning of the Roman Republic, and it's talking about the steps in terms of how did the entire Roman Republic function. And so remember that the Roman Republic, just for those of you who haven't studied this in a while, ends up spreading all the way up to England, right? So we have Hadrian's Wall in England. So we have this huge spread of the Roman Republic. So we want students to draw the steps, the trade routes, and then explain how it's connected to cultural diffusion throughout the European continent. So this clearly, question 5, is a geography and cultural diffusion. It's also a complicated question. I would call it an advanced question because it has to explain the trade routes. It has to explain cultural diffusion. Students need to connect it to other times and histories as well. And then the last question, how and why did Rome switch from being a republic to being an empire? And so this is really looking at this changeover, like, you know, how did the corruption lead to this? And so they need to talk about that. That's a target question, and it's related to political organization. So switching from the republic to an empire. So those are my final 3 questions. I'm going to map those out for you on my Excel document. So I know, what do students know? Do they know about the leaders? Do they know about the geography? What do they remember? So my question 4, I said, was a target question, and it's looking at learning objective 3, which is about geography and cultural diffusion. I'm going to make that a little bit bigger so when I'm looking at it, you actually are going to put this table right in the edTPA. You'll notice that your task 3 is super long. There you need to be inserting tables. You need to be inserting graphs. Don't just make tables, you also make graphs. That's why we're using Excel, because that makes it easy to do these graphs. So question 4. Now question 5 was my question also about geography and cultural diffusion. And my question 6 was my question, so learning objective 1, and that was about political organization. So how did Rome change from a republic to an empire? I'm gonna bring that out just a little bit. So you can see those. All right. And question number 5 was an advanced question. And question number 6 was a target question. Okay, so now I'm looking at my test, and instead of just saying, most of my students got a C, most of my students got a B, I can say, how did my students do on advanced questions? How did my students do on target questions? How did my students do with geography? Did they learn the geography and cultural diffusion things that I taught? Did they learn about the leaders? Do they know something about political organizations? Do my students know empire and republics? I can make greater claims by using this particular organization because I can say things like, although my students really understood physically how geography and cultural diffusion happened within the Roman Empire, they could see that physically. They really struggled with the more advanced concepts related to political organization and republics and empires and what each of them have to offer. Or maybe you could say the opposite. Let's see what students said. Okay, so I have this. I now have a map to my test, and that's your first step, okay? And then you're gonna go in and get the results of the test. Now, what we're gonna use for this is a binary coding system where the only choice is 0 or 1, right? You do this because 1 turns on that particular subject, right? So 1 means they did well in this, leaders. They got leaders questions right. They got political organization questions right. 0 is they did not get it, okay? And so when Ron took the test, he got question 1 right, which I'm going to put a 1 there. He got question 2 right, which I gave a 1 there. Question 3, he did not get right. Question 4, he got right. Question 5, he missed. And question 6, he missed. Okay. Now, Percy got question 1 right. So I put a 1 there. Question 2 right. And question 3, he missed. Question 4, he got right. Question 5, he got wrong. And question 6, he got right. Okay. So you can see there, already that there's a trend. This advanced question, both people missed that. This advanced question, both people missed that, right? So showing some, I'm already getting some results. I'm not just talking about grades, which don't really help us, right? Because they are this construction, right? We remember from Marzano, exact same test. There could be a 40-point range depending upon how teachers score it. So Neville 1, 2, 3, and 4, he got right, and he missed 5 and 6. And Luna got all of those correct, every single one, right? And so now we have a read on how each student did. But what we want to do is get some overall understanding of how students did, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to take an average, right, to find out what students got. So we're going to use a formula in Excel. And we're going to say, what is the average of these numbers? And I'm going to put it in a percentage. So on Excel, whenever you're in a document, you can choose the percentage up here, right? Okay. And so average does an average of all of these, right? So it averages the 1s and the 0s, right? So if this was all 1, the average would be 1, which is 100%. If they were all 0, the average would be 0%. But Ron got half of them right. So when you average it out, C5 to H5, you get 50%. Okay, so I'm going to do that one more time. How did I do that? And then I'm going to show you how to put it down. So if you notice in Excel, once I say equals, then I have the formula bar right up here. And I'm going to average things in a particular cell. So I'm going to choose this average. And then I'm going to put a parentheses so that it averages a group of cells. And then I'm going to highlight what those cells are. So for Percy, I'm in Percy's. So I'm going to highlight his first score here. And I'm going to pull my mouse along so that I have C6 to H6. Now, you can also just type this in. I find it easier to just highlight and do the whole thing, and then I'm going to do a close parentheses and hit enter. And first I'll end up with the decimal, and then I'm going to hit percentage and see that Percy got 67% of those questions right. Now, you could, so you don't have to do this for the whole class. You're going to have 25 students in your list. The other thing you can do on Excel is you can pull down the formula from one cell to the next. So this is average C5 to H5. You see that in the formula bar. And then the next one is average C6 to H6. So you're going to highlight here, and then you're going to pull down here, and you'll get Ron got 50%, Percy got 67, so did Neville, and Luna got 100%. If you click in there, it pulled down the average. Okay, now I want to, so that's my student level data. So I just figured out how did each student, so if I want to make, you know, claims about how Neville did, I now have his score on the overall test. But now maybe I want to take how people did on each question. Like, are there question level information that I need? So now I'm going to average the answers for each question. So question 1, in terms of percentage, 100%, right? I'm going to do this again just so you can see it. Average question 2, right? I'm going to hit percentage. Everybody got question 1 right. Everybody got question 2 right. Now I'm going to do my drag over here. Okay. And so that tells me right there what the whole class is, right? And then what each question, right? So question 1, people did really well on question 1, 2, and 4, right? They struggled with the most with question 3. Only one person got that right. And there was some struggling with question 5. Only one person got that right. Question 3, they also struggled with. Half got that right, and half got 6 right. Okay. All right, so that's my first step. But now maybe I want to just look at these in terms of basic, target, and advanced, and political organization, leaders, and geography. So I'm going to take my students here. And I'm going to simplify all those learning objectives into one. So rather than having 2 questions about political organization and 2 questions about leaders, I'm going to say, okay, how did people do on questions about political organization? How did people do on questions about leaders? And how did people do on questions about geography? Okay, so what that means is I am saying, what is the average for Ron? I'm going to average for political organization, I'm averaging C5 and E5, right? And H5, because those are all political organization, political organization, political organization. I'm going to end parentheses. So I'm averaging 1, 0, and 0, right? So I should have 33%, right? Because he got 1/3 of those. And now I want to do, what is the average that he got for questions about leaders? Now, there's only 1 question about leaders. So in this case, it's going to be just 1. Okay, do the percentage here. And then I'm going to have the average of his questions about geography. So for Ron, that is question 4 and question 5. If you put an extra space, it gives you that error message. All right, so now I have political organization, leaders, and geography. Now, the beautiful thing about Excel, the very many beautiful things about Excel is if I did the average of C5, E5, and H5, that's student level data about those particular columns. If I pull down, you'll notice that I don't have to type them in again because it automatically chooses C6, H6, E6, H6. That's why I'm going to put the students' names in the same order, because then when I pull down, it gives me the averages there. And I'm going to do the same thing for leaders and geography. So now I have a handy dandy graph that tells me how students did in each of these areas. So what I can say is that students really know more about leaders, and they know a little bit less about political organization and even less about geography. They struggled more on the geography questions than any other question, right? So this might be a place where I can hit a little bit harder. Now, some of that might have been because of complexity of question. And so I don't just want it in relation to political organization, leaders, and geography. I also want to say, okay, let's also think about this in terms of basic, target, and advanced. All right, and so in terms of basic questions, there was only one basic question, and for Ron, that, for everybody, that was question 1. And so I'm going to do my average there, and I'm going to make it a percentage. For my target questions, I'm going to do, so the average of D5, which is a target question, and F5, which is a target question, and H6, which is a target question. And I'm going to get 67% on that. And then advanced questions, these most difficult questions. There were 2 advanced questions. Okay, and so percentage on that was 0. I want to make sure that's in terms 0%. Okay, and so now I can pull down and get these for the whole group, right? So now I see that when I look at this, the reason I really like to do this particular analysis is because it lets me know, are students getting what I'm doing? Like, I might look at this particular exam and say, okay, wait, my average for my class was 71%. Maybe that's pretty low for me. Maybe I'm not super thrilled about that. When I then get to these basic, target, and advanced, then I know a little bit more about how students did overall when it came to complexity of question, right? So I have an 83% average on target questions and 100% average on the basic questions, right? So I'm looking at kind of a high B on my basic and target, which is where I want to be. Those are my goals. What's difficult here is the advanced questions are 38%. This might, I mean, one of the things I might say in my analysis is that maybe my test weighed too heavily the advanced questions, right? So Most people missed those 2 advanced questions, only 25% on this one, 50%. If I had replaced one of those advanced questions with a target question, then I might be, more directly hitting my learning goals. I might have had really high expectations with this particular exam. Maybe that's what you want, maybe that's not what you want, but it's worth talking about in your analysis. It's worth talking about how 2 out of 6 questions, so 1/3 of the test, was at this very high level of Bloom's taxonomy, which required this level of complexity that would be a struggle for students. So that's super important to do. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share for just a minute. We're going to save that. So you see here we have political organizations, leaders, and geography, and basic, target, and advance. And we have here these learning objectives. Each of these tables, I would put them in your, I would definitely put them in your edTPA, the exact tables. And I'm going to show you how to put graphs in there as well. Do that in just a second. So I just want you to think about, as you're doing this, what are the things that I want to talk about? I want to talk about each particular student. I want to talk about Luna being advanced. She got all the questions right. This might be a place why this short answer is really helpful when you're doing the analysis, because when you're doing the analysis, if you have the students' answers, where you're seeing Luna's responses and there's, a higher level of complexity in her responses, you can show some of those responses, talk about the things that she said and then how you responded to it. Now, remember, you do need to provide feedback on these exams, and you're going to be giving that to the edTPA, so make sure that you give good feedback on those as well. So I am now going to share my screen one more time just to show you how to do graphs in relation to these. So my graphs that I'm going to do are specific to each area that we studied. So I'm going to start out here. I'm going to highlight political organization, leaders, and geography. I'm going to highlight this whole table. And then I'm going to hit insert. And they call it on Excel, they call it charts. I believe on edTPA, they call it graphs. Okay, so what kind of chart am I going to do? I usually choose the bar charts. I think those are a little bit easier, right? And so you can see all I did was highlight it, hit insert chart, and I immediately have a chart here in relation to this. Now, once I'm on this, so I have a chart here, I'm going to click in here and I'm going to say learning objectives, right? Because this is about learning objectives. Now, there are different ways. I mean, I might be thinking about this on a student level data, but I want to think about it as learning objectives. So while I'm on this, you'll notice that when I'm on the chart, there is there are a number of different things. I can change the colors. I can do all kinds of things. This is really important. I'm going to hit switch row and column data. Okay, why am I doing that? I'm doing that because I want to talk specifically about the learning objectives, right? So what are people getting in terms of learning objectives? Now, maybe I don't want the whole class on there, but I actually do. It's up to you. You could just do individual people. But this is learning objectives. So you'll notice that Excel took it all the way up to 1.20%. I'm going to change that to 100%. Right, so all you do is just click on that area of the data and then it will take you so that you can see it. So now it's up to 100%. Now, when I'm having a discussion about how students did and do they know the leaders and can they talk about it, I can say, clearly my learning objective about leaders, students met that learning objective. On the test, they were able to demonstrate their knowledge of leaders. Across the board, the whole class was able to answer that, right? Then just physically, I can see that geography is lower, right? So I might say political organization, it really depends on the complexity of the question. Students did seem to demonstrate some understanding of political organization across the board. Ron struggled with this particular aspect. But overall, there was some general target understanding of political organization. Geography is the place where students really struggled. So a couple things with that chart is just, first of all, when you're on chart, if you double click it and select it, what I'm choosing here is switch row and data column. Now, if I want to focus in on people, right? Student level data. So if I want to call this one student learning, right? The focus of these charts is the learning. Someone can really just focus in on Luna. This chart is about Luna. Luna did really well on all of them. Ron struggled a bit on the test, but the place where he did well was the leaders, right? So that's how I make this chart. And, you know, feel free to change it as much as you want, and you can change the colors up here. You'll notice, see my mouse, that I'm choosing these different things. I kind of like the contrast of this one, right? And then switching that row and column data. Okay, so that gets me that. Now I'm going to go through this again so you can see how you do it. Once you have it in this table, it's pretty easy to do. So I can now say, I'm going to select all this data. I'm doing the whole class because the edTPA has you analyze the whole class in relation to your individual students. So I'm always going to do how did the whole class do as well. So I highlighted the whole table. Okay, so how did I make that? I go to Insert. So look up here in the top menu, File, Home, Insert. I'm going to click on Insert. And then underneath that is Recommended Charts. I've tried all the different charts. I'm telling you the bar one works the best, but feel free to experiment. I'm going to do the 2D column. Okay, so let's do the 3D column. You can also, if you wanted to do a clustered bar graph, kind of like this one better. Okay, so this is a 3D clustered column. I'm going to click on that. All right, this really is student level data, right? So this is student level data in terms of the complexity of the question, right? Because it's looking at Ron. The bars are telling me about students. So I'm using this to say, tell me about Ron, tell me about Percy, tell me about Neville. Maybe that's not what I want to do. Maybe I want to be talking about how this was a difficult test that was weighted pretty heavily towards advanced questions. 1/3 advanced questions is probably too much. That's okay if you did that. Okay, don't go change your test if that's the test you gave. What you need to just do is be reflective about it. So looking back, I realized I weighted the test too heavily towards these advanced concepts. How am I going to be able to say that? I'm going to switch my row and column data. That's up here, switch row and column data. Now I have basic, target, advanced, right? And so now I see everybody got the basic questions. Basic wise, my students are in a good place. Target, I'm doing pretty well on target. You know, I'm in that, we talked about, I'm in that 80%, 83% level. And it's really where advanced questions. And so then I can make some assessments here about how students did. And I can say that, you know, students did have understanding in each area. They were a little bit weak on geography, but overall what they struggled with were those more advanced questions that required a deeper level of analysis. So I want to talk about maybe in the future, or if I'm reteaching, or on my next unit, I'm going to do some more practice with that deeper level of analysis. I'm going to have students talk a little bit more about the deeper concepts during class so I can model that for them. So I'm going to talk about question level, right? And now I have another graph, right? So edTPA asks for tables and they ask for graphs. And so now you have both. You have two graphs you can use and 3 tables. You definitely need to include this table. I actually, if I were you, I would include all of these things. You need to include the learning objectives. You need to include the tables that talk about this, but you also need to talk about the graphs. If anything that you were to leave out, I would leave out this one and this one that summarizes what's in here. Because remember, this section here is just summarizing, it's aggregating all the questions about political organization into one statistic instead of having it individually. Okay, but you definitely want to include both the graphs and the table that gives the data per question. All right, I'm going to stop there now. All of these documents, the assessment data analysis, as well as the actual test, are up on the Canvas site for edTPA, so you can access those and you can work on creating your own data table. Feel free to just open this Excel document, and the formulas are in there. You can add columns, right? So you're going to have a lot more students. You can right click here. You can insert rows. So you can insert many rows, add your students. If you want to start with something, you can just delete the things that you don't have, take out the learning objectives, my learning objectives, and put in your learning objectives. All right, good luck. If you have any questions, feel free to email me.